So, Antti, yours was a PowerPoint, wasn't it? You green enough?
Yeah, hi. So, hi everyone. I'm going to give a quick presentation about our architecture in the web development of the accelerators controls at CERN. And what we've been doing in the last 2 years, what we have learned out of it, and what our conclusions so far. So to start with a quick introduction, currently at CERN, in the accelerators controls, we have 30 monolithic web applications that we've developed in a span of years with different technologies, Vue.js, AngularJS, Angular. And some of these technologies are actually obsolete. For example, AngularJS, the end of life was in January 2022, which has brought us into a situation that some of our applications, we have frozen the development of them, of any new features, because we have to actually migrate them to a new technology stack. Because at the same time, we find it quite challenging to recruit newcomers. It's not that easy to convince a new student to work with a technology that is not even supported by the company that developed it. So we sat down and we questioned our process and we said, how can we actually transform the way that we do things and find a way to actually stop these long development cycles and repeated migrations from one technology to the other in the long term. So we came across a new architecture that is called micro frontends, and we actually gave it a try in our infrastructure, in our environment. And what this architecture provides you, it allows you to create independent applications that then you can compose into a greater and more complicated one. And that gives you the possibility of incrementally upgrade your legacy code and eradicate at the same time. So these applications, because they're smaller, they tend to be simpler, and their code base, of course, is smaller as well. And at the same time, you have the different teams work independently, autonomously, with different methodologies and potentially technologies. I'm going to get back to this. We didn't really follow the autonomous technologies, let's say, but it is a possibility. So there are many different ways of implementing micro frontends. We evaluated 2 ways, and one of them is encapsulation and composition of modules in a single page application. And the other one is the approach of different URIs per micro frontend. I cannot go into details for both of them due to lack of time, but I'm going to mention a bit the one that we selected, and that is the different URIs. So what this approach follows is that each one of the application is independent, is isolated. All of them can be deployed granularly and separately. You can scale them and dynamically load the application that the user wants. If the user wants application 1, you just load that to them. You ignore the rest. And at the same time, you can always share common functionalities between the different applications. An example of an application that is with different URIs, a micro frontend, is you see, in this case, the monolith on the top picture, while at the same time, underneath, you see the new application that's a micro frontend. It is quite difficult to understand the differences, because that's the whole goal, to actually like make a smooth transition to the users. But actually, these are 2 separate applications, and they are completely independently deployable, and they have the different life cycle. Now, of course, every technology, every architecture has its own challenges, and I'm going to mention some of the challenges that we faced and how we dealt with them. Of course, you have different frameworks now that you are deploying, you are developing the different micro frontends, and if you try to, let's say, provide these applications to the users, the application size increases. You are trying to bring 2 different frameworks together. Of course, your application will double in size. In order to deal with that, we actually introduced caching of the static content, so the user can load it once, and then we are serving that content from his browser until a new version comes out. And we compressed the static content significantly. So we went in one example from 5.2 megabytes to 1.3, and from 24 seconds of loading in a remote environment, let's say from someone loading the application from home, to 1.5 seconds. So this improvement is actually visible both on the monolith and the micro frontends, because it was easy to implement on both sides. Of course, we had more challenges than this. Another challenge was the look and feel. So you're trying to actually minimize the difference for the users, because you're trying to keep them, let's say, work with the same application, while at the same time you want to provide some kind of new enhancement, some new ergonomics, follow some UX and UI designs. So to give you an example on how we try to actually implement that is we try to keep the core logic in between the applications. On the left is, again, the old application. On the right is the micro frontend. We try to keep the basic ergonomics in the same place, the same UI, but at the same time, we changed a bit the user experience. We brought, for example, the action buttons on the top right, because we saw that the users preferred it. So we are providing evolution to the application, but we are not really bringing a huge change to them. Another challenge was the state management. So now you have applications that they live completely separate. How do you make them communicate with each other? You need to change, you need to provide data from one application to the other sometimes. In order to deal with this, we created a set of rules. So what we said in principle is we will use only standard solutions out there, such as if you want to provide some kind of action, we will use on-click, on-input, the standard HTML events. And wherever possible, we will minimize the communication, the state exchange, but we will allow the user to transit from one to the other with hyperlinks. State management is quite complicated, and while this is not a perfect solution, it works for our use cases pretty well. And I think that in the future, we should be able to continue this way, and we should not face many issues. Another challenge is you are developing and you are testing now multiple applications, all these micro frontends, and you need to somehow standardize your process. It's nice to have freedom, but at the same time, freedom comes with other challenges. So in our case, we standardized our testing processes throughout the full stack. All of our micro frontends would have a similar approach to testing. Let's say approximately 80% of unit and component tests and 20% of integration and end-to-end testing. And at the same time, we put CI/CD throughout the whole development cycle. So we minimize the interaction of our developers. Everything is automated as much as possible, from the beginning of building the application to testing it, to publishing it, to deploying it. Everything is automated. I want to move a bit more now, after the challenges, on our development workflow and how it has evolved throughout the time that we have been doing micro frontends. As I said in the beginning, is that, of course, you can have this freedom of every team can do a different approach and it will work. In our case, what we saw is that we should somehow establish a certain workflow. And in order to do that, we created a task force that would work on multiple projects, on multiple micro frontends, in an iterative approach. So we would focus our development in the requested features, and then we would do quick iterations between the different projects. We will remove, let's say, the part of the monolith. We will focus on those features and rewriting that part of the application in a 3 to 4 week sprint, 3-week sprint approach. And then at the same time, the domain knowledge would be coming from the product owners of each of these monoliths. And we would try to prepare everything way in advance in order to be able to really focus, provide a quick solution, and move on to the next one. what we saw is that the technical knowledge would be coming from the team. The team is going now from different applications with different domains, different challenges. So at the same time, they are not really experts at the domain, but at the same time, they are able to share the knowledge on technical challenges with each other. So onboarding of newcomers became much faster because if they had to deal with something, someone of the members of the team would be like, I've faced this already, I know how to deal with it. And at the same time, multiple domains, they feel that they are now as a team, we are feeling that we can deal in a better way with the challenge that we are facing. What's more with this new development process is that our contributions have actually increased. As we have established a common set of technologies that we would build these micro frontends, the collaboration with other teams has become easier. So the other teams were more willing to contribute to these new application modules, following the standards that we have. The knowledge transfer between our team and other teams became faster and easier. And in the end, they saw that the return of investment would come really fast. Instead of waiting for a migration to last for 3 years, you could provide the solution that your users needed in a sprint or in years, like in a month. So we saw that the synergies were much better between the different teams, and we were more willing to actually cooperate and figure out problems together. So in conclusion, we've been doing this for 2 years now. We have really solidified our development process. We learned quite a bit. We understood very quickly that we need to establish a standardized set of tools, frameworks, and the processes we need to put in place. We saw that eventually sometimes you have some code duplication. You need to use some kind of configuration in multiple applications, and sometimes it's easier to simply duplicate than trying to complicate it more. The scope of each of these micro frontends has to be defined. You have to really see where do you draw the line, and then the more lightweight the micro frontend application is, the better in the long term. You move your business logic from the front end to the back end, and you know that the next investment on it, it will cost you less than what it would cost you now. So in general, micro frontends pretty much made us understand that it's inevitable. The change, especially in the front-end development, it is inevitable. You can't really stop that. And simply you have to embrace it and just go with it and really see how you can actually change the state of mind in you and in your team. So thank you very much. That's it. If you have any questions.
So, Jake, you just wave your hand.
So is this a sort of internal-only web application, or do you have any authentication and authorization on your API?
We have in all of them authentication, authorization.
So does that work nicely with the micro
Yes.
front ends? Does each front end have its own API that has its own access tokens, or is there a shared access token?
It's a shared access point.
Okay.
So what we have done, and maybe I cannot go into many details, but we can discuss afterwards, is that we have a common library, a common framework that we have built as like common solutions. For example, the authentication authorization is pretty much used and it's needed everywhere.
Yeah.
So we have created the code base for that. It's being shared as a dependency with all our applications.
Okay.
So they're following exactly the same approach.
Yeah.
And of course, it gives you the possibility if you want to split, let's say, but all of them right now, they're using exactly the same code.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions, Spencer?
Did you find yourself making many changes to the back-end API as you're refactoring this?
In some cases, we had to, of course, do changes in the backend because you are trying to facilitate the new features, you are trying to implement new things. That part is inevitable, but what we were doing at the same time, we were sitting and we were questioning, why is this piece of code in the front end? Why is this piece of code in the backend? Can we actually move the business logic all completely in the backend and keep the front end simple? So refactoring happened in both sides, but eventually what we see now is that when we revisit those micro frontends, it's much easier to work with them. But yeah, of course, to be honest, like it had to be done. The refactoring was done in both sides.
Okay. Well, if there's a quick one.
Somehow I had the feeling that state management is so hard because you jump back and forth from different URIs. So if you followed the other approach, would it have been easier? And so
we tested both, and I can go into details if you want offline, but what we saw is that in the end, when you're doing the other approach, this single page application, let's say that you combine them, they still are unaware of each other. They have access, let's say, to, the local storage, but you cannot really send events easily from one to the other. When you have two components in any framework, you say, I have this input, I have this output, right? Now, of course, you have the same, but let's say they don't use the same service. In Angular, we have the services which are singletons. In this case, there are no singletons anymore. It's like every micro frontend has their own singletons. So you can't really share it like that. You have to play with event loop. You have to send events, and that works, but it can become more complicated because the framework sometimes doesn't understand the HTML standards easily. But yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Antti, once more.
Thank you.